Okay, so I'm going to talk about a very traditional setting in southern New Guinea where there's a long-standing tradition of multilingualism. This is the part of the island of New Guinea that we're talking about. So the belly of the bird, and more specifically, it's this area here that I'll be referring to. This is an area of huge linguistic diversity. So this is a pretty small area, 300-400 kilometers from east to west, with about 40 languages in 9 unrelated language families. So very diverse indeed. And the languages I'll be focusing on today are these 3 here, Nen, Numbel, and Idi. So if we think as Nen as being like Tahitian, then Numbel might be like maybe Maori in terms of how close it is, and Idi like French. They're really, between Nen and Idi, they're completely different languages, even though they're next door to one another. The idea of egalitarian multilingualism, which was first formulated by the French linguist Audrey Court in New Caledonia, actually, is relevant here. That is, people don't see one language as better than another. What makes a language special is that it's your language or someone else's language. And it's normal to learn the languages of your neighbours or often your spouse. And that's something that allows the maintenance of these very high levels of linguistic diversity, because you don't have to have one language rolling all of the others before it. Back to the founding origin myths here, multilingualism is valorized. So if you think of the European Babel myth, where we have a punishment meted out to humankind in the form of many languages, here the very first creature, very first man on earth, walks past a sucker palm, this palm tree here, and he hears the voices of many languages coming out from the palm. And he already knows, even though he's alone in the world, that there's 3, 4, 5 languages in there. And place names are bilingual as well. There's many of those. So just to give one example, Sandirmit is the name of a sago place, and Sandir means a banksia tree in Nen, and mit means a stem in Idi. So lots and lots of place names have 2 parts, each drawn from a different language. One of the things that sustains this bi- and multilingualism is that marriage takes place through direct sister exchange. I give my sister to a man whose sister I marry, and they should come from another clan, which usually means, not always, but usually they come from another language. And this forms a special sort of family structure, which we can call a binuclear family. These 2 nucleuses who are very closely knit. You spend time with each other, you have obligations to each other. You may live in 2 different villages, but each will spend time in the others. And let's say if I'm here and I'm a Nen man, and I've married this woman here who maybe speaks Idi, but my brother-in-law here is an Idi man, so we have relations. So, and our children will relate to all of these people and speak at least those 2 languages to them. And there are special kin terms for these things. So, for example, Miti is a special type of cousin created by a consummated sister exchange. That means that people, in the course of their linguistic autobiography, would naturally become bilingual or multilingual. They might start that way from having different parents of different languages, or they might get to be that way as a result of marriage and moving during their lives. The commonest thing is that the woman goes to live in her husband's village, but there are some exceptions to that, so that if a man is unfortunate enough not to have a sister, then he has to sort of get a wife on hire purchase, as it were. That is, he goes to live, he pays some yams, he goes to live in the village of the wife, and then if he produces a daughter, the daughter gets fed into the system as the equivalent of a sister. And at that point in his life, he can decide, does he stay in the village he's moved to, sort of as an immigrant, or has he paid his debts and he can go back to his own village and live in his own area? But whichever way it works out, it means that people are usually coming out of this knowing at least the two languages of the partnership. So that's just different life histories. I'm not sure that I have time to go into that now. What I want to do is just to give an idea of what sort of actual language portfolios one finds in people of the region. So this is Jimmy Nimini, my chief language teacher. He speaks Nen, which is his own language, Idi, which is the language of his late mother, this old lady here, and it was also the language of his father's mother. So both him and his father got their wives from the same language group. He speaks Nambu, which is the language of his wife, Rusian, here. He speaks really great English. He speaks Hirimoto, he speaks Pidgin, and there are various other local languages he speaks as well. And he's not exceptional in any way. That creates family groups like this. So this is sort of the women in that household, and old Wake is an Iri speaker, Rusian, his wife, is a Nambu speaker, the kids are Nen speakers, just as their single dominant language, but all of them would speak all of those languages. And here's a mother and daughter, so Rusian, who's a Nambu speaker, and Yal, who's a Nen speaker, but each speaks those two languages and others. We've done a lot of surveying of people there, partly just asking them, what languages do you speak? But they don't just list the languages, they give quite sensitive descriptions of how well. It's not just like I can hear it, but it might be I can hear everything and speak the easy bits, or I can obey commands, but I can't say everything, or a fairly finely graded scale. As well as that, we get people to speak multiple languages in our interviews, so we can check how real people's assessments are, and they tend to be very accurate. So if you look at the numbers of languages in which people are fluent, we've got several people of those we interviewed knowing 7. That's really fluent. And then one unusual person who can just speak 1 fluently, but she also knows a couple of others, so she has 3. So she's the lowest performer in the group, but there's several people who have good knowledge of at least 9, and there may be others who know even more. It's not at all unusual in the area. So how long have I got now? 2 minutes, okay. I'll just give you a little flavour for how people talk about their language repertoires. So for everyone we've been interviewing as part of this project, I emphasise it's not a project particularly on multilingualism. It's on the patterning of language diversity and language differences in the region. We ask people biographical questions: where were you born, where does your wife come from, what was the exchange, and so on. But we do have some language questions. And we ask that interview in as many languages as people want to do it. And the interview could take place with the interviewer asking in one language and the response coming in another. It's just whatever people want to do. So as part of that, people say things like this. So this is a man called Garambal, and he says, I can speak and hear the Gundama language. English, I know it and can write it and speak it. Pidgin, I can hear and speak and write it on paper. I can speak and hear and write it in Motu. Now, I should tell you something that I haven't mentioned yet, which is this is a village which is extremely remote. There is no electricity, there is no telecommunications, there is no health, there is no roads. The people I'm talking about here have grade 3, grade 4 education at most. So these things are not products of formal education. They are products of just traditional language learning. Here's another person, her name's Dagama, saying, okay, white people's language, that is English, I can respond to easy stuff. Okay, then she gives an example to Gim's wife, so a woman who came from a long way off. When she speaks English, where it's hard, I can't speak, though my understanding goes further. And I can understand a lot of the Highland people's language, that's Tokpisian. I'll listen carefully and understand what he's saying to me. So that's just to give you an idea of how people are responding there. I mean, they're fairly thoughtful and considered in their examples, and they don't overstate their knowledge. They're pretty accurate. This is another man who's interesting because he had to marry into the village, leaving his own village because he didn't have an exchange, and he felt rather bad that his own clan hadn't supported him by giving a woman to exchange. And he's saying, Gundama, that's a different language I can only understand. My own language here, I won't talk it in my own language. Now, people wouldn't mind, but he just feels bitter about his clansmen who've abandoned him. So now he's sort of become a bit of a sort of classic immigrant who secondarily identifies with the area he's moved to. So now he says, I speak only an Akama language, which is them. Okay, so just to finish up, I'll just mention some conclusions that Southern New Guinea has maintained high levels of traditional multilingualism. It's a place where we can see how probably many humans have lived for a long time without the influence of metropolitan languages being significant. This exists with high levels of linguistic diversity. The languages, some of them are very different from one another. It's not as if they've all just converged through this. Choice of language has a clear social indexing function. It shows who you are, but also who you know and who you relate to. And for the languages that we've got transcripts of, so we've been able to transcribe 3 of the languages in this set, people learn them to an extraordinarily high level of fluency, and they're very difficult levels, they're very difficult languages. I'll stop there, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much. Would you like to ask a question?
Jacques.
Quel est l'effet de l'éducation formelle sur ce haut degré de multilinguisme lié à la vie?